I'd like to welcome all of you to today's meeting, and in a moment I want to introduce Catherine Page, who will introduce our speaker. I first want to note that the church has undertaken some refuse disposal policies that I don't fully understand, but which may have some effect on how we supply those of you who come to eat lunch here. Also, I want to note that on June on one of our future meetings, we expect to have Sandra Samuels from the North Side Achievement Zone speaking, and we have several more. We'll get the announcements to you by email. Catherine Page is part of our group that plans these meetings. She's a former principal of Highland Elementary School in Columbia Heights. While principal, her school won a number of awards. It was named a 5-star school in both reading and math, according to Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment, MCA 2 scores, and was also named a National Distinguished Title I school and received a Spotlight Award from the Minnesota Academic Excellence Foundation. Catherine has a Bachelor of Science degree from Mankato State University, a Master's in Education from the University of Minnesota, and an Educational Administration licensure for grades K through 12 from St. Mary's University. We're recording the speaker today, and with his consent, we'll place his talk on our website. The website address is minachievementgap.org. Because we're recording the speaker's presentation, questions will be considered that are written on the 3x5 cards on your table. And these cards will be picked up by Grant Abbott, I think. Then they will be proposed to our speaker. The coffee and water are at the back of the hall, and we close the meetings by 1:30 p.m. So I'd like to introduce now Catherine Page.
Welcome. We are honored to have Fred Storti here with us today, the Executive Director of the Minnesota Elementary School Principals Association, or MESPA. Fred has been Executive Director for the past 11 years. Fred started his career as an elementary school teacher and then was a principal and superintendent. He worked for 27 years as a principal and superintendent in different school settings, rural, urban, and suburban. Fred feels that the most memorable accomplishment for him as a principal superintendent was founding the East Metro Integration District in 1996. The tri-district schools started out with 3 districts and morphed into 10 under his leadership. He was hired by MESPA in 2002 when 75% of the membership were baby boomers. Fred thought that keeping the membership numbers up would be a big problem. But as a result of engaging the membership and developing member-driven services such as professional development and communications, the membership has remained stable during declining enrollment and declining funding for public schools. I can say personally that during Fred's tenure, when No Child Left Behind and the MCAs were already going, but their consequences were now coming. And this was a major worry for many, many principals. But Fred was always there for us and MESPA, and having professional development opportunities were lifesavers for many of us. Fred feels that the greatest challenge during his tenure has also been his greatest success. MESPA developed a workable strategic plan with 5 goals that the leadership and members understood. This has helped develop an association that has a commitment to purpose, a commitment to analysis and feedback, and a commitment to action, all very important. I'm sorry to say that Fred will be retiring on June 30th. He will be greatly missed, and I want to thank him for his leadership throughout the years, and I know we all do too. Fred feels blessed to have had two careers, really, one as an educator, principal, superintendent, and the other as the director of MESPA, executive director of MESPA. So again, we want to thank him very much for all the work he's done, being a champion for our students and our principals. Fred.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really honored and humbled to be here. As I look around this room, I haven't seen John Muriel in years. Peter and I served on the Ready for K board. Governor Quee and I served on the Ready for K board. Todd Otis was the executive director of that great group. Judy Farmer, I worked with on the Alliance of Student Achievement. Neil Nickerson is one of my favorite college people. And there are lots of people here that I'm just very honored to have an opportunity, along with Don, who also served on the Ready for K board. So it's really an honor to be here. Also, I have to say that I'm a very proud father of two adult daughters. One now who is in the second year of being a elementary school principal over in the North St. Paul Maplewood Oakdale district. And I also have to say that I think it was the good spiritual guidance of Grant Abbott that helped her to get there, because we went to Grant's church when we lived in Roseville. So thank you so much for that. So anyway, great to be here. I have a whole bunch of stuff I'd like to cover. I know that you want to talk and learn mostly about the principal evaluation process and the impact it's having on principals. I kind of broke this talk down into actually about 9 different areas. First of all, I'd like to tell you a little bit about MESPA, just real briefly. Then I'd like to put into context public education. What did it look like in 1640 when it started? What does it look like today? I'd like to talk a little bit about principal licensure requirements. That's one of the things the committee asked me to focus on. A little bit about what does a typical job description look like for an elementary school principal. The impact, of course, on legislation of principal evaluation. The process that MESPA and 3 other professional associations developed around principal evaluation. A little bit about the Minnesota Principals Academy, and Julie Schweitzer is here. I know Julie spoke with you about 1.5 years ago, and it's been a great collaboration with the University of Minnesota. And just touch briefly on the Principals Academy. And then finally, I'd just like to talk a little bit about a program that we have at MESPA called the Minnesota School of Excellence Program. Then we got questions and answers, right? All right. Okay, we're going to all do all those 9 by 1 o'clock. That's the plan, right? Okay. Anyway, on the table, there's a little brochure here. We call this the What's MESPA brochure. So just real briefly, MESPA is a professional organization. We have most of the K-8 principals, public school, charter school principals, and a few parochial school principals that belong to MESPA. You can see our vision on the front to be the premier resource for preparing today's principals for tomorrow, and a strong leading voice for public education. Inside, you can see our officers. And Chris Stevie is our current president. Joey Page is our president-elect from the Richfield School District. Chris is from Cambridge Isani. Tim is our secretary-treasurer, and Mark is our NASP rep. Those 4 people are full-time acting principals that serve as elected officers in the organization. In the office itself, that's my job. I get paid to be the executive director of the association, and we have 3 other staff that help out. And if you asked a principal why they belong to MESPA, the top 2 things they'd probably say would be 1, professional development, and 2, legal assistance and advocacy. Being a principal today is almost like being a mini attorney in many ways. And one of the things that we do is we help principals solve legal problems. On the back side of this little brochure, you can see the state. We have 12 different districts in this 12 different divisions in the state. Minneapolis, St. Paul are 2 by themselves. We have 4 suburban and then 6 outstate Minnesota divisions. And so we get a big board. There's like 36 members from across the state on our board. We do a lot of professional development. When I came to MESPA 11 years ago, we did about 9 days a year of professional development. Recently, we've been doing about 30 to 40 days a year of professional development. So that's really an important thing for our members. One other thing you have on your table is this little awards brochure, and I wanted to show you that. Whoop. Yeah. Stay by the mic. Okay. I can't wander too much. John said you don't look like a wanderer. Well, so I'll try not to wander too much. But you'll see this little page here on some of our awards that we have. And I wanted to show you this specifically because a lot of the friends and colleagues here said, Fred, I heard you retired. Who's taking your place? And this gentleman right here, John Millerhagen, who just happens to be our National Distinguished Principal this year, is going to be the next executive director of MESPA. John's been a principal for 17 years and a teacher before that, and I know he'll do a great job helping out principals in the state of Minnesota. You can see a few of the other awards that we give, and a little bit later I'm going to talk about this Minnesota School of Excellence program that we have down here. Okay? So let's jump into this. And I said I just thought it might be kind of fun to talk about the evolution of public education. And this information, I have to give credit to Jamie Vollmer. Anybody heard Jamie Vollmer speak? Jamie's a kind of a motivational speaker. Yep, Judy probably brought him to Minnesota. He's done a lot of work with school boards. And I was always impressed when he started to do this piece on how education has changed. So we know that public schools started back in 1640, and the main mission was to teach the basics of reading, writing, and math, arithmetic, and also to cultivate some civics, some values for a democratic society. And so from 1640 to 1900, things stayed somewhat the same, although the Industrial Revolution and immigration in the 1800s really started to drive changes in public education. So let's just go back to the 20th century here. And so in about 1900, 1910, some additional responsibilities were shifted to school: nutrition, immunization, and health. In 1910 to 1930, we added phy-ed, the practical arts, home ec, vocational education, and school transportation was mandated. In the 1940s, we added business, art and music, speech and drama, half-day kindergarten, and school lunch programs. In the 1950s, we added science and math education, and I think as we think back to that time, a big part of that, what happened then was Sputnik, right? And so that kind of propelled our efforts to increase our science and math education programs. Safety education, driver ed, expanded music and art, stronger foreign language requirements, and the controversial sex education. In 1960s, we added advanced placement, Head Start, Title I, adult education, consumer education, career education, peace, leisure, recreational education. And let me say that the 1960s were really a big time for the expansion of federal education. If you think back to 1965, that's when the Education and Secondary Education Act started, ESEA, sometimes referred to today as No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind is really just a small part of ESEA. Started in 1965. There's been some reauthorizations. We're still trying to reauthorize it. It was up in 2007. We're still trying to get that reauthorized. Hopefully that will happen in the next few years here. Okay, in the 1970s, American family breakup accelerated, and we added drug and alcohol abuse, parenting, behavior adjustment classes, character ed, special ed, Title IX. That was a huge impact on our schools, a huge positive impact, I think, on public education. Environmental ed, women's studies, African American heritage education, school breakfast started to come, which is just a great thing and is happening in most of our schools by a high percentage of kids today, and actually a higher percentage every year. Okay, in the 1980s, the print gets smaller and the list gets longer. The floodgates open, keyboarding, global lab, multicultural education, non-sex education, ESL, teen pregnancy, Hispanic heritage, early childhood, jumpstart, full day K, which we're still trying to get funded here in Minnesota. Hopefully that's going to happen this year. Preschool programs, after-school programs, alternative ed, stranger danger, anti-smoking, sexual abuse, expanded health, and child abuse monitoring. And child abuse monitoring is really a big thing and a very positive thing that happened in the 1980s. 1990s, we added conflict resolution, AIDS, CPR, deaf education, American 2000 initiatives, a Republican initiative, inclusion, which is a special education issue of working with kids in classrooms, expanded computer and technology, distance learning, tech prep, technical adequacy, assessment, post-secondary options. That was a big one. Governor Quee, I think that might have been shortly after your time.
Yeah, right after.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
and that was a big deal. That was like, what, about the 1996 or something? So we were the first state in the nation to have post-secondary options and a leader in that area. And Goals 2000 was a Democratic initiative, expanded gifted and talented at-risk homeless education, gang education, service learning, and bus safety, bike safety, gun safety, water education safety. And I'm almost done here. And then in the 21st century, we've added No Child Left Behind, which is really a part of the, ESEA, bully prevention, harassment, child care. I didn't know about elevator and escalator education, but apparently it was done somewhere. Body mass, organ donor, personal finance, entrepreneurial, media literacy, contextual learning, health and wellness, and Race to the Top, which was one of the latest Democratic initiatives. Now, are we doing all of this in every school every day? No, we aren't. It's a little bit dramatic, but the reality is a lot has been added to the school curriculum, and that's a challenge for us today in schools, is making sure that the curriculum isn't a mile wide and an inch deep. And that is one of our challenges that we work on. Now, Catherine and Don asked me to talk a little bit about principal licensure. What does it take to be a principal in Minnesota? And I must say, Minnesota has some of the highest standards in the nation. And this is for public school principals. It does not include parochial school, private school, or charter school principals. Charter school principals do not have to be licensed as a principal. The basic requirement comes from the Minnesota's rules, 315.12. And so 3 successful years of classroom teaching experience is the minimal requirement for teaching. And a lot of the great principals I know taught longer than that, because with the focus on instructional leadership today, that's really huge. The job of the principal has really changed a lot. We were talking about this a little bit before the meeting. I was a principal for 27 years. When I started in 1975, principals were more managerial. They were involved in instruction, but there's a larger focus on being a manager. Today, we want our principals to be instructional leaders as well. And we want them to be good managers as well, because obviously if you can't manage well, you're not going to be able to lead well instructionally. What else do principals have to do? Actually, we have, Minnesota has competencies, 96 competencies. And so K-12 superintendents, K-12 principals, directors of special ed need to have a specialist degree or a doctorate degree or a program consisting of 60 semester credits beyond the bachelor's degree for their preparation for educational administration. Also, and this is something that Neil Nickerson could tell you a lot about, and what I always appreciated so much about Neil at the University of Minnesota is every year he would bring to me the syllabus of the educational administration courses and ask me for input. Is this relevant? What needs to change? What are your recommendations, Fred? And I know he did that with many other people as well. He led, and as many other colleges do, the internship. And so principals also, beyond those credits, have to have 320 hours of an internship in a school. Now, this is a K-12 principal licensure. It used to be elementary licensure, secondary licensure. Now, it's all K-12 licensure. So if I'm an elementary teacher and I'm going to get my license, I have to do the 320 hours, but actually 200 of those hours I need to do in secondary administration. So I better understand secondary school, and vice versa. Secondary person needs to do the 200 in elementary education. And I think that's really an important thing. And in terms of principals and K-12 licensure, they're very different jobs. I mean, they're very much alike, but they're very different jobs as well. Elementary school principals in this day and age are pretty much one woman or one man operations with not a whole lot of support services. Secondary school principals, especially high schools, tend to have more, because they're big, they tend to have more assistant principals and a few counselors and a few more people that they can delegate to and work with. Elementary school principals are really kind of right in the trenches, doing all of the responsibilities, both instructionally and managerial. Okay, so those are the rules of licensure in the state, just touching on that briefly. And I'm going to kind of get back to these competencies a little bit, these 96 competencies that principals have to have when I talk about the principal evaluation process that we develop. Now, this is a typical principal, let's just take a look at what a typical principal job description could be. This is actually one that we developed a few years back. MESPA did, because superintendents would often call us and say, hey, do you have a model principal job description that you can share with us? So I got a committee of principals together. We did some research. Sorry, Grant, thank you. And here's the 5 major areas. So in under educational leadership, I'm not going to read all these things to you. Here's a few of the things that you would find. There's like 44 components to this. There's 15 things. I won't read them all to you under educational leadership. The first couple are what the principal will do. And one is to demonstrate ethical and professional standards, work to hire and retain high-quality staff and provide appropriate supervision that will ensure professional growth, develop and follow professional growth plan for him or herself as a principal, and monitor student learning. It's become an increasingly more important thing for the principal. In terms of educational leadership with the staff and working with teachers, here are a couple of the components. Develop a building vision that sets high expectations for students and staff. Use multiple sources of data to develop and plan for improvement of student achievement. And that's been a big change in the last 10 years, the use of data to better inform instruction. And one of the things we find out in schools is that there is no shortage of data. The challenge is how to use it effectively, isn't it? Another thing that principals do to help staff: provide appropriate educational opportunities for all students, plan and implement staff development opportunities for all staff members, and align and implement national standards, state standards, and assessments within the curriculum. Under communication, the second area, I'll just name a few, being able to articulate the school's vision and mission, developing an atmosphere of openness, confidentiality, and trust. Without trust, there is no leadership. Trust is the most important thing that a principal, and I think any leader, needs to inspire to lead well. And then the last one I'll read is use appropriate culture and gender-based norms in communication and in the curriculum. Under the next area of school-community relationships, the elementary principal will maintain a positive school climate and school morale, model shared leadership and decision-making strategies, develop a collaborative efforts between the school and the community, encourage and develop parents and guardians' involvementship and partnerships, and deal effectively with the media. Okay, under 4, interaction with students, develop and implement a positive, effective student management system. So important. Maintain a safe learning environment. Has been a huge issue within the last 10 years. It has really changed. And of course, work to meet the diverse needs of students, enrichment, remediation, special education, work to see that those are met as best as possible. And then the last one is the other management issues, which deal with prioritized issues that arise on a daily basis. And somebody said to me, I remember when I came to MESPA 11 years ago, how is that different than being a principal, being at the association office? I said, you know, the big difference is my day is a little bit more planful. There are less surprises, and you know what? There aren't as many people mad at me either that I know about, that's for sure. Okay, develop and implement effective student discipline plans, develop and implement building emergency plans, work with the district and buildings to develop building budgets, very important. Be aware of the legal policies regarding, but not limited to, special ed and discipline and all those kinds of things. That's why when I came on board 11 years ago, we started legal seminars around the state of Minnesota for principals, so they could hopefully be more proactive around those legal issues. Develop plans for securing and allocating financial and human resources. Manage the physical plant operation. Be aware of bargaining units contracts. Principals work with employee groups, especially in the larger systems, Minneapolis and St. Paul and the suburbs, that might have 6 or 7 different employee bargaining groups, and they need to be aware and know how to manage within those groups. So that's what a typical job description looks like. All right, now let's move on to what I think you really wanted to hear about, and that is the impact of the principal evaluation legislation that took place in 2011. And Don was kind enough to bring, I think we got a handout on the table here that kind of outlines that. And so let me just jump in right away with what that looks like. Sorry for the tilt here, but at least we get the bigger screen rather than the little screen. Okay, so in 2011, here's what the legislature mandated. There's really 8 things, and I think they're on that list as well, that need to go into a principal evaluation process. This is to take place, every school district in Minnesota, all 331, have to have this evaluation system in place by 2013, 2014, next year. So, and I'll get to how we've kind of helped be proactive with moving toward that. All right, so we got to support, what we like is that it should really be about professional development. Many times, principals are the forgotten ones, quite honestly, when it comes to legislation and funding for professional development. And it's critical that they have the opportunity to grow. That's why we're so high on the Minnesota Principals Academy. So support and improve principals' instructional leadership, organizational, professional development, strengthen the principal's capacity in the areas of instruction, there we go, supervision, huge, evaluation, and teacher development. 2, to include formative and summative evaluations. Formative evaluations are those ones that we do, along throughout the year that help to inform instruction or help to inform changes. Summative evaluations is that end of the year review that principals and teachers get. 3, be consistent with the principal's job description, a district's long-term plan and goals, the principal's own professional multi-growth plans and goals, all of which must support the principal's leadership behavior and practice, rigorous curriculum, school performance, and high-quality instruction. Okay, 4, it shall include, which we think is really a good thing, on-the-job evaluations and previous evaluations. 5, many districts have done this, but it's part of the mandate, allow for surveys to help a principal's effectiveness leadership skills and processes, strengths and weaknesses, and exercising leadership in pursuit of school success. Those surveys can include parents, they can include staff, they can include students, they could include school board members. There's some flexibility at the local level on how those surveys should be done. 6, use longitudinal data on student academic growth as 35% of the principal's total evaluation. 7, again, it should be linked to professional development to emphasize improved teaching and learning, curriculum and instruction, student learning, and collaborative professional culture. Again, that instructional leadership is so critical and is showing through here. And 8, for principals not meeting standards of professional practice or other criteria under the supervision, implement a plan to improve the principal's performance and specify the procedure and consequence if the principal's performance is not improved. The provisions of this paragraph are intended to provide districts with sufficient flexibility to accommodate districts meeting goals and related to developing and supporting principal evaluation. So that's basically the legislation in a nutshell for principal evaluation for all school districts to implement next year. And let me talk a little bit about what we did as professional associations to get to that point. So back in 2010, we knew that this was a big issue in our society. And I got together with my colleagues at that time, Charlie Kite, who was the exec of the superintendent's group, Joanne Knuth, the executive director of the secondary principals, the executive director of the Minnesota Board of School Administrators, Stan Mack, and myself. And we said, you know, the 4 of our associations really need to come together, be proactive, and develop a principal evaluation process that will help our members meet this is before the legislation, and actually a lot of the legislation was crafted around our process. So we set out in the summer of 2010 with a 17-member committee from superintendents, principals, folks from those 4 different organizations to develop this process. And what we struggled with at first was, what should the framework of this be? There's so many good frameworks out there. It could be the ISLIC standards. Those are standards that colleges and universities use. It could be the National Association of Elementary School Principals has got some great standards. It could be Marzano. It could be Reeves. But anyway, we decided that it was important for it to be Minnesota-based. We already have these competencies that 14 colleges and universities in the state of Minnesota are to be teaching their principal candidates. So we said, let's look at those competencies. They're in rule, they're in statute. Let's use them as a way of developing a framework for our evaluation process. Now there's 96 of them, so that was a bit much in terms of trying to do 96 indicators on your form. So we kind of boiled those down, but here are the competencies: leadership, organizational management, diversity leadership, policy and law, political influence and governance, communication, community relationships, curriculum planning and development, instructional management for success for all learners, human resource management, values and ethics in leadership, judgment and problem analysis, safety and security. And then also principals get an extra 3. And that is instructional leadership. Once again, we see that important focus on instructional leadership, monitoring student behavior, and I feel really good about C here because I know there's so many of us in the room here that believe so deeply of how powerful minimizing the achievement gap could be if we could do a better job of aligning the early childhood providers and the K-3, the K-12 providers, that I know that many of you in this room are very passionate about that and have served on different boards and so on to help that move forward. So anyway, we take those 90, under each of those those 16 things, there are several. You can't really see this, but we took all of those competencies, all 96, and we said, look, we got to make a workable framework. So here's what the framework is. We took strategic leadership and we cross-referenced the concepts that would work there. We called the next one instructional leadership, cross-reference. And I called the next one managerial leadership, cultural leadership, communications leadership, school community leadership, and ethical professional leadership. So that then became the framework for our model of the four associations. And we worked on that in the summer of 2010, and actually we wanted to get it done by December of that year because our goal was to get it done to present to the legislature. We wanted to give them a document that we would hope would have an impact on what was fashioned, and I think it did help the process. We came up with a rubric. Here it is, and I have to say, we did a lot of research review to develop this program. We also looked at what are other states doing, and we came upon 3 states that were doing some good things: Iowa, North Carolina, and Illinois. We took their models, and we used a few ideas from their models as well as we developed our process. So that's the rubric: unsatisfactory, developing, proficient, accomplished, and distinguished. Now, I'm so sorry, you can't see this, but let me tell you a little bit about the process here and how the flow of this thing goes. And I won't, because we're running kind of short of time here, I won't belabor it. But so what does that look like? Well, the superintendent's job is to really help develop the process in conjunction with the principals, and to meet, say, in the summer of the year with all the principals to review their school improvement plans, talk about their goals, talk about professional growth plans. And then the superintendent orientates the principal on what the process is. And then the principal goes and conducts a self-assessment using those 7 areas that I just talked about. And they do that before the pre-evaluation conference. So then the principal goes off, does that, and the superintendent or the superintendent's designee get together, and they talk about targets to set around the district goals, the building goals, and using that framework. Then once they've agreed on what those goals should be, they go off and they do their work. And throughout the year, superintendents or the principal supervisor will visit the building, we'll look at data, we'll give feedback, we'll look at surveys, and so there's some formative instruction that we hope will take place to redirect behaviors. And then at the end of the year, there is the summative review with the principal and the superintendent. And then from that, a principal writes a growth plan. So that's kind of the flow of the way we see it working. Now, at the end, we wanted to make sure that there were 2 tracks that a principal would be on. One, the professional growth plan. Hey, you're doing a good job, but you need to work in these areas. Or the remediation plan. You're not doing such a good job in these areas. Here are some things you need to work on, and we really need to designate those areas and talk about some benchmarks of how we're going to improve. So it really talks in that legislation about a 2-tiered approach. This is kind of what it looks like in reality. Okay? All right. Now, I'm going to shift gears now. That was the association's plan. Now we're going to go to the MDE plan. The Department of Ed also developed a plan a year later after the legislation came out. So this would have been, 2011, 2012. And they came forth with a plan. I'm sorry, this is so small here. But they have basically 5 competencies, and we'll look at those on the next screen. But I wanted to put this one up first just to kind of give you an idea. In that plan, 50% of the evaluation pie, being 100%, is really based on the supervisor's data that they've collected and information that they have reviewed through observations, assessment, and so on. Then 15% of the plan is that survey piece that we've talked about. And that survey piece is rating based on stakeholder feedback. Could be, again, could be parents, could be teachers, could be community members, can be students, or combination of those things. It's really, again, a district prerogative to kind of decide where to focus on. And it might change depending on principal strengths and weaknesses. Okay, and then the last one is this 35% issue around student performance measures. And so the big question there is what should be in that? There's so much data. What should be the drivers that we look at? And what we feel good about it is flexibility on the part of principals and school districts to determine what those things should be. So it could be student proficiency rates. That could be like from the MCA scores. Could be student growth. We like student growth because we can see an impact on student growth, where they started and how they've done in a year. Reduction of achievement gaps. That's part of this plan, which is a really good part of the plan. Graduation rates is a part of the plan. Obviously, for elementary school principals, is not as big of a piece as it is for secondary school principals, but we're all in a system together to make that happen. So that's how the pie looks. Then let's take a look at what was the framework that MDE came up with. We were a part of that, I should say. I don't know if there was anybody else in the room here that was on that committee, but it was a fairly large group of about 30 people, school board members, parents, superintendents, principals, business people that developed, along with MDE, their process. And you can see that their framework is mission and vision, instructional leadership, HR, human resources, professional and ethical relationships, and resource management. They have a rubric very similar to ours. I'm giving you the short version of this because we're running short of time here. So those are the two options that are out there. That doesn't mean that those are the only two. We have 331 school districts in Minnesota. 100 of those districts have less than 800 kids in a K-12 system. Less than 800 kids, okay? So we've got Minneapolis, St. Paul, suburban districts, other big city districts. Many of them already have pretty sophisticated principal evaluation processes. Others don't have processes. And so one of the things we tried to do when we developed the association model was to do something that all school districts in Minnesota could use. It's not so sophisticated. It's not 90 pages long. That is kind of doable. So the districts do have the option of using our plan, the MDE plan, a hybrid of those, another plan. They just need to have those 8 components that we talked about embedded in that process. Okay? All right. So the big question is, how does a principal affect student achievement? And Julie Schweitzer, thank you very much for that slide, and some others I'm going to use here in just a few minutes. No, I guess I got this one for the MDE. Principals really can affect student achievement. And some people say good principals can affect a student achievement by 25%. We know that the teacher is the most important person in terms of student achievement. We were talking a little bit about this before the meeting, and we talked about some of the schools we've been to. We've got a great teacher here, and kind of a mediocre teacher here, and a not-so-great one here, and 5 great ones over there. But you know what? You don't have great schools without great principals. Somebody has to be the cheerleader. Somebody has to pull it all together and make this all work. And we really believe that by enhancing principals' knowledge and skills, by them demonstrating the appropriate behaviors, and working on teaching and learning conditions and helping teachers with their behaviors, we will really affect student achievement. I'm going to go on and kind of give you a quick overview of the Minnesota Principals Academy because we feel so strongly that this is a great program that we have in place. And for those of you that were here a year and a half ago and remember Julie's presentation, please excuse me for going over a little bit of this, but this goes back to 2005. And when Commissioner Seagren was there, she had seen a program called the National Institute for School Leaders Program, called the NISL program. And she called us in her office and said, Fred and Joanne and Julie and Charlie, what do you know about this program? What do you think about it? And I looked at it, and I saw that a couple of the people on the advisory committee were the executive director of National Association of Elementary School Principals and National Association of Secondary School Principals. So I picked up the phone and I called Vince Ferrandino. I said, Vince, tell me about this NISL program. And he said it's a great program. And there was a whole lot of research put into it. So anyway, we started the process. And I have to say thanks very much to Steve Kelly. Steve was the senator that carried this bill in 2005 to implement an academy, and named in the bill was really the University of Minnesota and MDE, and all of these groups partnered together to make this happen. The secondary principals, University of Minnesota, the Minnesota Business Partnership was a part of the early conversations and was very supportive of it. We developed a leadership team. To date, I think it's over 300, but we have about over 300. We have had over 300 principals actually go through this now in the various cohorts. The first leadership team was trained in 2006, and what we really did is we set out to find 48 strong principals that this was a train-the-trainer model. So we got some money from the legislature to do this. There was no charge to them, but the commitment was that they would come, they would learn, they would turn around and help train future cohorts. And that's where Julie and the University of Minnesota and their people, they were the ones that really organized and made this all work. And before I forget, I just want to go back and say I had an opportunity as a young principal back in the 80s to participate in one of the best professional development opportunities I've ever had in my life, and that was John Muriel's Principals Leadership Program. I was in the second cohort. It was, I don't know, over 2 years, about 32 days, and it was an excellent, excellent opportunity. Times have changed. We don't quite have that kind of funding to make those happen to the degree that we'd like it to. This is the next best thing in this day and age. And the challenge we've had is funding it. And it was funded in 2005 for the biennium, and then the funding dropped as money was tighter, and then it was refunded a little bit, and it's amazing that we made it work this long, kind of on shoestring budgets. And I'm pleased to say that today in the House Omnibus Education Bill, the Principals Academy is there at the moment. It's not there in the Senate Omnibus Education Bill. We're still working on that, and we're hoping in the legislative process here that it does get funding. Everybody seems to be favorable on both sides of the aisle of this program, and so we're hoping that this gets funded for the next biennium. And I think the funding amount is about $450,000 for this. Our goal is to get another 100 principals through the program. You can see some of the current districts that have gone through it or are going through it. I must say, my daughter, second-year principal, I was so thrilled that she could have the opportunity to go through the Principals Academy, and she will say that this has been a real highlight of her career so far. The curriculum, we talked about NISL. They spent $10 million developing this program. It was really the best of business, military, and instructional leadership. Covers theory, practice, and policy. Uses a lot of case studies. It's updated regularly. And we adapt it to Minnesota issues. In fact, we're getting ready. Here are an overview of the units. There's 14. For this past year, a number of us had been meeting at the university under the leadership of Ken Dragseth, who works there now, talking about what could Principals Academy 2.0, as I like to call it, look like. Should we continue with NISL? How should it be different? And we feel the NISL's program really strong, but we need to Minnesotaize it, so to speak, and we're going to be adding some components like early childhood leadership, like cultural diversity and community engagement to the program. And then here are the final curriculum pieces of it. What I really like about this is in the driving for results part, the principal is a change agent, leading for results, and that culminating activity is really an application activity where the principal will take a problem or an issue or a focus of their school and use what they've learned here to solve that problem. So that's the Principals Academy. There's been some research, a little bit of research done that has shown it's a positive thing for student achievement in Pennsylvania and Massachusetts. That's happened. I think I talked a little about funding here. So that's enough of that. I want to make sure we have time for questions, and I just want to touch upon the last program, and that's our program, the Minnesota Elementary School Principals Association Minnesota School of Excellence program. I have to tell you, I'm really dating myself here, but I was on the group that met in 1984 as a young principal that talked about the School of Excellence program. And we started to develop it then. It's morphed. Back in 2005, we used the NAESP standards for this program, and it's a self-assessment program. So principals that do this engage their teachers, their non-licensed staff, their parents, their community, looking at those 6 standards on what are we good at, what do we need to improve upon, and then they develop an improvement process. We have a committee of 12 principals from across the state that validate or non-validate it, and then we celebrate it. We celebrate the good things. I just have to tell you, Wednesday I was up in Net Lake. It's the first time I've been to a reservation school that's been a Minnesota School of Excellence. And to see that community come together, small school. In fact, they didn't even hold it in the school. They held it at the community building, the tribal headquarters. And to see that whole community just embrace these 6 standards and try to improve what they're doing was fabulous. And it was just a wonderful celebration. Anyway, here's a couple of examples. We've got, since the program started, we have 161 schools now that have been validated. The validation lasts for 7 years. About 5 to 10 schools a year get validated in the process. On that sheet there, I think there's a picture of 7 principals that were validated for this year. Okay. Not too bad, all of that. And
Very good. Thank you very much.
absolutely.
I'm supposed to stand near the
Okay,
microphone
I will get
too.
out of here.
No, you
Okay.
don't get out of here. You're much
I thought
more
you were going to answer the question.
No,
You're going to ask them.
Okay, so you've had an easy time so far. Now we've got the questions. Especially the Net Lake story
Uh-huh.
can kind of be the background for this. How do principals learn to develop a school culture that has the respect of the parents of their diverse student body and facilitates the learning of all students? And then the corollary to this, is it still the job of schools to assimilate students into the white dominant culture, or to help all students learn to accommodate an increasingly diverse country and global culture?
Wow, that's a big question. Okay. So first of all, how do principals do this? Really by engaging their staff and the community in the process. And this is an excellent example, this School of Excellence process that we have of doing that. And so we actually have a rubric and a process that you can use to look at those standards and say, how are we doing in community engagement? Are parents involved here? Are community members involved here? How are our standards? How are we doing with the use of data in making decisions? What kind of assessments are we using? So it's really a process. The other important thing of this is that if there is no vision and mission for the school, then it's critical that principals be involved in the leadership of developing that vision, a preferred future for this school and the community. It's really important for them to develop with their staff and parents and community the mission. What are we going to do there? How are we going to reach that ideal future? So it's a dance. It's a lot of community involvement. The other question, I get that? The other part of the question was the cultural diversity and...
Yeah, and just, especially, let's take Net Lake, where
Yep.
teachers there really are teaching two cultures there.
Right.
Trying to accommodate the honoring of American Indian culture.
You bet.
As well as the other culture. But some of the urban centers, you might have a school that has
Sure.
14 different cultures.
Mhm.
So how does a principal learn how to create this culture to get the norms that all of the parents can say, I can affirm those, my cultural values are affirmed in that. I do want my kids to learn how to function in the dominant culture too, but I want to make sure my culture is not being denigrated by the school.
Sure.
And so and then are we teaching our kids to be adaptable to this increasingly diverse culture and global economy?
Well, one of the things that a principal needs to do today is, because we become increasingly more diverse, is to really create values, expectations within a school community, because we come with many different values and cultural backgrounds. But to make a school work, we have to have agreement on what are the 3 to 5 most important things that we're going to do in this school, whether it be around student discipline, around management, and around curriculum. And that takes a lot of conversations. It takes inviting people in and talking about the school and where they want to go. It also takes some education on what is the curriculum, what are some of the state standards, what are the things that we're trying to accomplish here. So it's a complicated process, but I think leading the vision, making sure that we have a mission that we stay true to, having goals for the school, and then modeling those goals along with community folks will get us there.
Right. Well, and then there's a follow-up question here as to how that kind of cultural understanding and proficiency plays out with the Principals Academy. Is that sort of you talked about that sort of the
Right.
culminating thing. How does the Principals Academy help? How does it help the principals to do this? It didn't seem like it was prominent in the list.
And that's one of the areas that we want to add, to add actually more cultural awareness and diversity. There are also some great case studies that in the academy that principals look at around Singapore and other countries on what they have done to create really good student achievement and great schools.
Right. I mean, I was surprised when I was in Singapore that they have their tests are 4 different languages that they honor, 4 different cultures, and you can take your tests in Malay or Mandarin or Tamil or English. Pretty amazing.
That is great.
Now here's also another really sort of broad question. When this principal evaluation was being constructed, how did the legislation address the realities of educational disparity and how what has been proposed is going to close the achievement gap? Sort of like, what was the philosophy of change or logic model around this that said, if we do these things, the achievement, opportunity, culture gap will be closed in Minnesota?
That's a good question. That's a tough question. And I'm not quite sure what they were thinking when they did the legislation. I do think that those 8 things that they talked about there are important, and they talk about the professional growth and development of principals. And, there's some great programs out there on cultural diversity, like the NUA, National Urban Association training. That's a whole part of professional development. Absolutely. It's really a professional growth area. For some people, they have had more sensitivity and experience to that than others, in an area that I think principals are really aware of and want to embrace. And again, I think by having the conversations with people in their community, that will come through.
I mean, that's, it's a tough thing. I'm going to ask you just from your own personal experience.
Sure.
When you're a principal of a school and you have diverse cultures, and you have, say, some very vocal parents who do see the job as the schools to teach, in quotes, American values, and you're trying to talk to them about, well, we need also to understand cultures from Indonesia and American Indian culture, and we're including that in our curriculum, and we're trying to honor that, and the people who are concerned about American values get upset that you're sort of not staying true to what's really American. How do you handle that as a principal working with all of these parents?
Yeah, that again, you certainly, that is a challenge. And I think one of the best things is by demonstrating that is to have people involved in what are the expectations in the school and how we treat each other. Because those things are universal and archetypal, so to speak. We treat each other with respect when we don't let any bullying occur. We know that bullying is a huge issue today, and it's not just a school issue. That's a community issue as well. But one of the things is to have those core 3 to 5 expectations that we all rally around and agree on. Now, we may have a little disagreement sometimes on exactly how to get there, but it's really important that everybody understands what those core expectations are, and that's kind of the true north that helps us get there. Yeah.
So this is more really nuts and bolts question about licensure and instruction for principals. Sort of relates to the Harvard Business School model of a lot of case studies and things. So it is, with respect to licensure, how much time is spent on real life role playing situations versus just lecture, questions and answers, and maybe some papers? Who, if there are these simulations, who observes and evaluates? And then I think this is saying once a person gets out of this, are there follow-up observations?
So this is for the higher ed, for the
This
licensing.
is for licensure,
Right, right.
become a principal.
Sure. Well, obviously in Minnesota, we've got these 96 competencies, and all 14 of the colleges and universities in Minnesota are supposed to have their curriculums around those. And colleges and universities are becoming increasingly more engaging with the application of those competencies. For instance, in order to get your degree, I know like at the University of Minnesota, you have to go before a panel of 4 professors and licensed principals and demonstrate your knowledge and understanding of those 96 competencies that we took a look at. So, and I think some of the work that the Bush Foundation has been working on with follow-up and connecting higher ed to principal candidates and to teachers really makes a lot of sense. I also have to say that Senator Franken has been a real champion of, he's got a recruiting and retention bill for principals, and it really has to do with recruiting principals of color, all principals, to become licensed as a principal and then making a commitment back in that school community of 3 to 5 years in being a principal. And I think that's one of the challenges, to have a more diverse principalship that's more representative of those school communities.
Fred, I want to thank you on behalf of the committee for being here.